The year was 1834, and the very first white people in the history of the world to ever live here were right out there.
3 companions, Lewis Crandall, Peter Giles, and Mr. Hunt, decided that they were going to stake a claim and become settlers. They loaded up canoes and supplies and headed downriver for many miles until they found a suitable piece of land. When suitable land was found, they erected rudimentary cabins that were very crude in design. One of the cabins measured 10 by 12 feet. Upon completion of the cabins, Peter Gile, missing his wife and kids, decided to load up the canoes, and with Lewis Crandall, they traveled back upriver to retrieve the family and supplies. The canoes were overloaded with iron, most likely intended to be made into farming implements. 2 young children, a small boy and a young girl, were stowed away in a dry box, which was lashed in between the canoes. Together, the wife, 2 kids, and 2 adult males went down the river towards the homestead.
It was getting dark, and they were almost to their destination when disaster struck. The canoes, which were overloaded with iron and supplies, hit a tree in the river and tipped over. And everything that was in the canoes was lost. Peter Giles and his wife clung to the branches.
The only one that could swim in the group was Lewis Crandall, and he hit the water, swam to the shore, and took off running through the woods in the dark to retrieve another canoe from the cabins. It took many hours for Crandall to return. Rowing upstream, he was greeted in the dark by the boy who clung to the wooden dry box. The family was rescued and eventually taken to the cabins. The following morning, the body of a drowned child was recovered and buried. The wife of Peter Giles recently overcame a case of the measles. Because of the hours spent in the cold water, she fell into a fever. Peter Giles cared for her the best he could in the small 10 by 12 cabin. On the 3rd day, she died. Peter Giles abandoned the idea of becoming a settler. Lewis Crandall, however, settled the land, built a farm, and successfully operated a ferry that would allow other pioneers to bring their supplies over the river and to bring their crops and their animals and their harvest to the cities, and thus the town was born. So join me as we hit the river in search of adventure and history. Our quest is to find something left of the old ferry, as well as artifacts that were left behind by the pioneers of the American Midwest.
This river is immensely powerful. Nothing stands in its way. Everything is temporary.
This history book, which was written in the late 1800s, tells us that the original pioneers of this county settled on Section 18, which became the Crandall Farm. That would be a good place to metal detect. Let's look at this 134-year-old plat book and see if we can find Section 18 and the Crandall Farm. Here's what the farms typically look like back in the day. The book is loaded with these wonderful drawings of what the farms looked like. And so here it is. Here we have Section 18. And I see a name, L.F. Crandall. So this is the place that we need to go. We need to figure out where this is in real life. Now the name on the map, L.F. Crandall, Lafayette Crandall, shows this guy right here. This is a charcoal drawing. This was the brother of the hero in the story, which is Lewis Crandall, who tried to save the drowning family. But he's the one that eventually owned the farm, and he operated the ferry. So this guy died in 1898, and if we can metal detect, a lot of the things that we find might have been owned by him, one of the earliest pioneers. Okay, and so this was the man's wife. Her name was Lavinia. Some of the things that we could find could have belonged to this person right here. And this is a very old charcoal drawing. It's not a photograph. So is it true? Is Section 18 130 something years ago? Would that be the same thing as Section 18 today? I think it is. Let me show you something. Now, unbelievably, this book actually has a picture of the Crandall Farm and what it looked like back in the 1800s. Isn't that amazing how good a job they did? Now the bad news, the bad thing about this is that all of these buildings right here are going to be gone. They wouldn't have survived, and so they probably would have been burned, and so there's going to be a ton of square nails that we're going to have to pick through. Now, if you look where the pencil is pointed right there, that's not a bridge crossing the river. That's where the ferry was. There was actually a ferry that went across the river, and the Crandalls operated it. So we got to go out there and see if we can find that. We actually have a picture of it. It looked like this right here. Very nice relic here. I think it's an axe head. I hope that it is. I don't know. It's a broken axe head, I think. Yes. The guys who used this axe head, whoever it was, they knew, probably heard stories, told stories about the Black Hawk War. And that was back in like 1830s, you know? And settlers were moving in, they were cutting down trees, they were doing agriculture, they were changing the land, they were changing the landscape. And the Indians were tired of it, and they decided to fight back. So what it was is that, you know, you would go to bed at night in your log cabin, and Indians would be in the Blackhawks would be in the timber, and they would wait for things to quiet down, and then they would ambush the house, and they would try to get in and try to break the door down. Now they had guns back then too, the natives did. They didn't have a lot of gunpowder, but they had guns. And so if they broke the door down, then they would try to, you know, kill everyone with clubs. So I bet you that the guys who used this had stories, all types of stories of like what it was like to have people in the trees watching you. Very good find here. I need an apprentice or someone to like sit alongside with a laptop and look up all the things that I'm finding here. I just pulled this out. I already looked at it, but this right here is a snaffle bit, right? It's for a horse. I may have found the other piece of the snaffle bit. Let me pull it out and see what it is. No, it's not. Wow. Wow, that is nice.
Do you know what that is? Isn't this part of a single T? So this hooked up to like a bunch of horses or oxen, and you can see how like oblong it is. They must have done some really heavy duty work with this. So this is for plowing, or it could have been for like pulling around logs or something like this. But do you know how much work it is digging stuff like this out of the ground with this? This is amazing. It's a hatchet, right? I imagine that once the crops were planted in the springtime and everything was established, that you would spend all summer repairing barns and putting those old wood shingles back on the roof and cutting firewood, and like you had to get ready. You had to use good weather to get ready for bad weather. And I guarantee you this is just 1800s, and I'm very happy to find stuff like this, so we're really lucky. I just spent about 15 minutes digging this up. So they were laying in the ground perfectly like that, like together. I thought it was a horseshoe at first. You know, why wouldn't they have been like this or something? I think that something held them together. I have no idea what this could be, but it's old, it's big, it's iron, and it's part of the story. What do you think this is right here? It's gold plated. I think it's the back of a clock. It's a gold plated backing plate. And the reason why I think is because there is a letter punched in there that has an S, and there's a letter punched in there, stamped in there, that has an F. So that must mean slow and fast. I've been digging deep iron all day, which is fine for me because I'm a relic hunter, not really a coin hunter. I want the history, I want the story. But this iron out here is all old stuff, and it's really deep. Some of it's like a foot deep. So, but you have to remember, when you're digging in a permission, you have to be mindful of the homeowner. If you go in there with a great big giant shovel, they might get put off by that and then tell you that, you know, you got to go home. So. Look at my face. That's the face I make when I get really excited. I make a similar face when I'm very happy. It's from playing sports in college. You don't show emotions, but I found something. I think it's amazing. I thought it was a lipstick container, right? But then I noticed that it was rounded over there, and it's got this pattern on it. It's like knurled. If you look, it's small, it's like brass probably, and it has this pattern on it right here, and it's rounded. It's getting dark, but at least it cooled off. Hey, have you ever heard of like a lead spindle cap, I think it's called? Listen, it's a high tone.
It's really heavy. I think it's lead. Look at it. Yeah, check it out. It's definitely lead. Maybe it was some type of like something that would go on the end of a spindle that had like thread or yarn or something like that. But I've heard of these things. I think it's a lead spindle end. I just found a head stamp. Now, people aren't crazy about head stamps, but every single one, no matter what, has information stamped into the face of it. And you can actually go back and look these up and figure out where it was made, when it was made. So let's take a close-up. So this one right here says WRA Company, and the name of the lineup is Rival. So I've got to look that up. We can figure out how old this is. This ground is ridiculously tough in some places. Very hard to dig, especially with this little digger right here. But if you want to get permission, you got to use little diggers like this. Man, the owner was pretty willing to let me dig out here, and I'm really happy for that. I'm breathing in bugs. That's how hot and muggy and buggy it is. Okay, I got a signal. Listen. Okay, now that's what I'm supposed to say. Oh, it's a deep dime signal, because it is, but it's not going to be a dime. No. These were farmers from the 1800s. They didn't even have a store. Why would they have a dime? It's not going to be a dime. So it's not a dime, but it is this. Now, in 1860s, there was a railroad here. So, I mean, you could probably order stuff through the mail. As a matter of fact, there was actually a post office here. But you could actually order stuff through the mail, and it would take a long time to get here. So you had to make sure that you had everything you needed to get the job done. There are so many relics here that I just don't know what to think. How come none of the other places I have ever detected have been this target rich? Is it like every place that I've ever detected has been like hunted to death, and that's why I have to work so hard to find anything? Because I've had a hard time today because I can barely swing the coil and move 3 feet because there's another relic. Let me show you something here. These holes that I'm digging are almost elbow deep. You know, when I stick my hand all the way down there, I'm almost up to my elbow. And normally a person that's metal detecting would not dig a hole that deep just to get a scrap of iron out. But what I'm doing is actually history hunting. It's not regular metal detecting. And the relics are so deep that I actually went out and bought a flat bar to pull the iron up out of the ground. So let's see what it is. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what that is, but if I clean it up, I might be able to connect it with an activity that occurred out here. Okay, so what I have here is a very old shotgun head stamp. Now this one is what they would call like high brass. UMC number 10. There's 2 trains of thought in metal detecting. A lot of people go out and they detect until it gets hot, and then they say, well, that's pretty good, I think we'll go home now. They find what they find, and they've got this happy-go-lucky approach to it, which works. That's the healthiest option. And then there's some people that just can't leave it alone. They've got to dig deeper. They got to detect more, detect all day in the heat. And I think I might be one of those people. It's not healthy to be obsessive over it. So after this video, and I've always wanted to do this video, after this video I think I'll tone it down a little bit because it's 100 degrees out here and I'm out here with a crowbar elbow deep in the soil ripping iron out. Is that unhealthy? Okay, listen to this. Okay, so there's a high tone down there and it's that deep, and the reason why it's a high tone is because it's a big piece of iron. So yeah, oh, I just got dirt all over my face. Like a giant spike or something. So oh no. Okay, it's another snaffle bit. I think it is.
Yes, it is. Look at that. Isn't that nice? Let's take a look. This bit right here was underneath 6 inches of gravel. What really makes this interesting to me is not that it's just an old piece of iron, but this is a symbol of somebody's life. Somebody worked very hard, and they had horses, and they worked and they worked and they worked. Out here, like the early pioneers, they had the personality, I think, that I just described. You had to cut down trees, and then you had to fell the trees, and you had to wrap them up with chains, and you had to hook up the horses or the mules, and you had to drag them across the ice and the snow, and then you had to get a two-man saw, and then you had to cut the joist and the timbers and the shingles, and it was just non-stop grueling labor. But these people chose that. They came here from the city. They chose that. To them, the freedom, the ability to actually work and actually get ahead in life meant a lot to them, because out here on the farm, you can get ahead if you work 12 hours a day. And your reward was that you didn't freeze to death, and you raised some kids, but then there was, they died of disease, and it was tough. So the reward was there, but it was always questionable. And I think that's why a lot of them were religious, because they had to have that idea of, we're gonna work hard, we might fail, but in the end, you go to the great, the great beyond. And we're just gonna try as hard as we can now, and eventually we'll get there. So could this be something that Lafayette Crandall's wife actually owned? This lady right here in this picture? Could this be hers? That looks pretty old. So I'm in the orchard now, and this is it. This is the last place that I can detect here. I've detected about 5 acres. So there comes a point when you have to say, I found what I found. Now, I think that I did find something from the original pioneers of this place back in 1830s, 1840s. I think I did, because I found a lot. But I'm not quite entirely satisfied yet. So I'm gonna hit this and just give it all I got. It's a silver dollar. I think it said 1903. It's a barber, right? It's a barber. Well, it's a half dollar. It's a barber half dollar from 1903. I thought it said 1803. My detector isn't that great. It's fine for what I'm doing, but it's not like a coin shooting detector. But I wonder how many coins, silver coins, I've missed. But something this big, a chunk of silver this big, half dollar, is big enough to where I think any detector could have found that. Check out that sunset behind me. Isn't that great? Look at it.
Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation, there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling.
So typically, when you find
a piece of iron that has historical value, you like to clean it up and preserve it using a process called electrolysis. You know, this thing has been laying in the ground for I don't know how many years. And if I were to take a wire brush and try to clean it physically, I would remove a lot of the metal and big chunks would come out of it. There's a better method. Let's look at it. I'm gonna build an electrolysis tank. So I'm gonna use a 5-gallon bucket as a vessel to hold the solution. I'm also gonna need some corrugated steel. So the idea is to put this in the bucket and surround the iron relic with it. That way I can kind of blast it from all sides with electricity, which is going to do the work. So I need to take a piece of corrugated steel and place it in the bucket. Now this steel is going to act as a giant electrode and it's going to hit the relic with electricity from all sides. Okay, the next thing I need to do is I need to make a type of hoist that will allow me to suspend this relic in a solution. So I have a square dowel here and some steel wire. So now I have like a hoist mechanism in place. I'm gonna put that in the bucket so that it's suspended. Okay, so this electrolyte consists of nothing other than baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, and I'm gonna put about 25 cents worth of powder in there. The next step is to take the negative battery clamp from a battery charger, an old-fashioned battery charger, the new ones don't work, and connect it to the steel wire that is connected to the relic. The positive battery clamp goes to the corrugated metal. Okay, so you can see that we have this axe head in this boiling oil right here. And so what that's doing is that it's driving off the water. And you can see that what's boiling is not the oil, it's all the water that's trapped in the imperfections on the surface of the metal. If we do this right, then all the water will be driven out of this iron and it will be protected by oil and it will never rust again. Yeah, so you can see just how much water is in this thing, and when all the water has been driven off, all those imperfections will be filled with oil. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to see, you know, old iron being, you know, restored and preserved. It's going to be a museum quality display here. So that's what happens when you get it a little bit too hot. So then you just step back and blow it out. It'll be fine. Okay, that was really hard metal detecting. We're back in the basement of the library, which is like my very own personal research room. But it's time to talk about the best find of the trip, and that is this axe right here. How old is this? Could this axe have been used by the very first pioneers that built the cabins? We need to look into this. I wanted to find out some more information about this axe, so I took some pictures of it and posted it on a blacksmith forum. Members of the blacksmith community discussed it and came to a consensus. They said that it's in the shape of a broadaxe, which is used to take round timbers and hew them into square lumbers, exactly what an early pioneer would need to build a cabin. One of the members posted an exact copy, size and shape of the axe head that I posted. He said there's a maker's mark on it, Daniel Simmons Company, number 6. The Daniel Simmons Company was known for making high-quality axes. Daniel Simmons died in 1860. Now, in metal detecting, you can't force things into categories, but the form and function of this tool matches up with the time period that the story occurred in. I can't say that this guy definitely used this axe. I can't say that the original pioneers definitely used this axe, but this is something that someone of that time period would have used to take trees and turn them into lumber for cabins. That's all that we can say about this, but in any case, it's an amazing find, and we were very fortunate. Does this look like it belonged to him? It's a good match. What is that? Could this be it? Could this big timber here with metal in it, could that be part of the ferry? Yeah. You have to be careful. You can't jump to conclusions just because you want it to be so. Let's look at it. Never seen anything like it. I'm going to actually have to take this home. I've got to get this thing in the boat. I've got to take it home. There's no way I can, clean it up out here. So it's going to be a chore, but that may be something, I mean, I've never seen anything like that before. I mean, does that look like it could have been part of a ferry that was right here? And there's no telling. Out here in the country, lots of stuff washes up, but it's in the right spot. So it's just going to be a pain getting it in the boat and cleaning it up. Look at this place. If something was going to be preserved for 150 years, this would be the type of stuff that would do it. Definitely. Look at this place. This is what the early settlers had to deal with here. Every step you take is just labor, climbing through the grass, walking through the mud, swatting mosquitoes. Like, everything about it is uncomfortable. And here you can see that trees are abundant. Sunshine is abundant. Water is abundant. So if you wanted to make a living and you wanted to, build your own cabin and build your own church and raise your crops, this was an all right place. Here's a piece of wood with a perfectly straight notch cut into it. What could that have been? Who would have done that? The detector says that there's iron here, but it's underneath 3 feet of mud and massive tree roots, so we're not going to find anything in these conditions. There's iron here, but in these conditions, you look at my feet, in these conditions, it's just absolutely futile. So let's move on. There it is. You think that's a piece of the ferry? I had to go in the water and get it. Does it look like a ferry to you? I don't know, but guess what? My boat broke. The pull cord broke, which is a common thing to happen. So I'm getting towed in right now, but hey, I am not leaving without a giant log with iron sticking out of it. No way. Yeah, see, there's a cord right here, see? And this cord is supposed to go in there, and the whole thing broke, which is a common thing to happen. And you should replace this like every 5 years, but well, there you go. So I like adventure. We got wet, we got in the water, we went metal detecting and mud. I pulled out a great big piece of iron, and I don't know, we're gonna take it home and clean it up, but.
And unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return.
Most of us live in a bubble where what we do every day and our immediate surroundings is our reality. Out here in the wilderness, reality is for real. So out here, there's three things that can happen. And the reality is that it's guaranteed to happen. Number one, you starve to death. You can't find good enough food, high quality food, and you'll starve. The second thing that can happen is that you get sick. You get hit by a disease and you would weaken and die. The third thing is that out here, right here where I'm standing, in the wintertime, you would just literally just freeze to death. I mean, it's just lethal cold. So all of those three things, they form a triangle and they work in tandem. If you are hungry, that makes you more susceptible to cold, and that makes you more susceptible to disease. Or if you're sick, then you don't have the energy you need to get the food, and therefore the cold is so much worse for you. All of these things form, there's this 3-point triangle where you have hunger, disease, and cold. And that's the reality out here. And if you don't want that to happen, you've got to raise the axe. You've got to forge iron. You've got to fell the trees, make shelters, skin animals, plow the fields. It's digging, it's hacking, it's sawing, it's hammering, it's pounding. It's constant work to keep those three things from happening. So whenever I find iron from old homesteads, it's pretty neat because this represents somebody's attempt, somebody's fight against the reality of living in the wilderness out here. Pretty scary looking, huh? Look at that. I was sitting out here digging up some of this 22 long, which I hope is not everywhere, but it might be. I look over in the grass and I saw something. I thought it was an animal, like a possum, like watching me, laying low, trying to let me pass rather than run away. But it looks like something from a ferry, but there's just no telling. Look at it. Look at this right here. As we walk up into the grass, there's like some kind of log in there that's been worked. It's been worked by hands, I think. Look at this. Look at this. It's rock solid in the ground. This part right here has been cut to be a mushroom shape, and this right here has been wallowed out. Like, why would you do that? Why would you cut this right here? Would a rope go there? Or maybe a rope would go around. It looks very, very suspicious. Why would somebody do this? Why would somebody cut this log right here other than to put like some kind of chain or some kind of ropes? I mean, who would waste their time? It's not a chair. It's not somebody doing like a artwork or something, but it's so suspicious. Could this be it? Could this be something from the 1800s ferry? It's unbelievable if it is. In some places, it takes a long time for wood to rot, particularly if it's packed with mud. And maybe this is something from the 1800s, but the only way I think it would have survived is if like a huge flood came and covered it up with mud for about 100 years, and then the mud was washed away, you know, when the next, you know, massive flood system came through. But in the Midwest, that happens. Things get buried and uncovered every single year. I mean, absolutely. So this is bizarre. This is really getting bad out here. In metal detecting, you have to know when to say when, and we're getting to that point. The ferry I'm looking for, or the activity that I'm looking for, is here. We're so close. We're right here. But back in the 80s, this was somebody's weekend campsite, you know, and this is from the 80s. And they just left so much junk out here. I mean, beer cans and tent stakes and torn up, shredded everything. Whoever they were bad. Look how massive this tree is compared to the shovel. You see that? You see how unbelievably huge that tree is? These trees don't get this big in the forest with all the other trees. The reason why is because I think like sometime in the last century, somebody liked this tree and they cut down all the other trees around it. If you cut down all the other trees around it, then that reduces the competition. And so this tree has a head start in life. It doesn't have any other trees to compete with because somebody cut them down. And so it grows to monstrous proportions, and when it gets big enough, then it basically won. No other tree can grow in this area because of all the shade that it produces. So whenever you see a massive tree, like historic, like this one right here, you might suppose that somebody cut down all the other trees around it because they liked this one and they wanted it as a shade tree. Yeah, that's pretty big. So if this is the ferry tie down, let's just say it is, there's a massive tree over there. That may have been a shade tree for the person that was working the ferry. So that's all I've got. That's as good as I can do. We never did find the ferry. It's been missing for 60 plus years now. The river's too powerful. It's been lost in time. But if you made it this far in the film, you're the type of person who gets it. You understand the value of history and the role your forefathers had in shaping our modern day lives. And so with that, I feel a sense of accomplishment. We used an old map from the 1800s and a history book from the 1800s to trace the steps of the early settlers, and we found some good relics. And that's about as good as you can do. Thank you.